in this series on keys to understand the book of Revelation, we're now looking at the second key. Now, in the previous session, when we looked at the first key, which was how to divide the times, the past and the present, and that was so important. Revelation 4 and verse 1, the Apostle John had said to us, or this is where Jesus spoke to John about the time frame of things that were going to happen, how to divide the book of Revelation. He said, "Come up here and I will show you things which must take place after this." Revelation 1, 2 and 3 had shown us the past up to the present time of John. But after Revelation 4 and verse 1, he's now looking into the future and what God has planned and prepared. So in this second session, we want to know the outline of the book of Revelation. This is the second key. To know the outline of the book of Revelation and its chronological sequence. Now, John had seen these two visions, the past and the future. Now we have the book of Revelation. So how do we divide it up? John's got a vision that takes us all the way down to the end times. And we see chapter by chapter this vision, this wonderful revelation of how God is going to bring everything into consummation. So we see this chapter outline of the book of Revelation. Chapter 1 to chapter 3 is the warning to the church. Christ came with flaming eyes, bringing judgment, because judgment begins first in the house of God. And then we find in chapters 4 and 5, after Jesus has said to John, "Come up here, I'm going to show you what's going to take place," he now sees the vision of the church that is going to be ready to fulfill God's plan in the last days. In chapter 6, the Lamb now begins to open the 7 seals. Chapter 7, we have the 144,000 and the great harvest. And there's two perspectives. There's a Jewish perspective and then there's a Gentile perspective. And we'll see these things later on. In chapter 8 to 10, the 7th seal. This is an amazing moment. This is the perfection of the church. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and the 7 trumpets begin to be sounded. Then in chapters 11, 12 and 13, we have the 3.5-year period of time spoken of very specifically, prophesied in Daniel 7, Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 12, speaking of the last 3.5 years before the second coming of Christ. And we see in chapter 11, we see the story of the overcomers, and we see the 2 witnesses. We see in chapter 12 how the overcomers are taken to that place of protection on eagle wing power. And then in chapter 13, we see the rise of the Antichrist. Chapters 14 to 18 give us the harvest of the 7 judgment, the 7 vials of wrath, the 7 thunders that are going to be poured out on the face of the earth during that great tribulation period of time. An unbelieving world is going to be facing the judgment of God because they received the number 666. And they submitted themselves to Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. In chapter 19, we see the glorious coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, the second coming, and with his glory, he will destroy all ungodliness. In chapter 20, we have the millennium and the great white throne of judgment. What a time that's going to be. Satan will be bound for 1,000 years. The Antichrist and the false prophet are already in the lake of fire. And then in Revelation 21 to 22, the New Jerusalem and eternity. So we have chapters 1 to 3, the past, and then from chapters 4 to 22, we have the future. From the end of the 1st century until the end of time. This is the vision that Jesus gave to John concerning the events leading up to the end of time. If we want to understand the book of Revelation, understand the chapter divisions. God bless you.